My Playful Wife, Episode 26, Saloni's Voice, written by Mia. She sang in the shower on Tuesday mornings. I had known this for 3 years and never once heard it. I want to be exact about that because it is the whole of the episode and the whole of what I had learned and kept learning, that knowing a thing and hearing it are not the same, that you can live beside a sound for 3 years and have it not reach you, blocked by the simple fact that you are not listening, that listening is not a thing the ears do automatically, but a thing the whole attention has to choose to do. I had known, the way you know the furniture, that Saloni sometimes made sound in the shower. I had filed it under the ambient data of a shared life, along with the click of the geyser and the particular complaint of the bathroom tap, and I had never once actually heard it because I had never once been listening. When I started listening, I heard she had a good voice. Not trained, not performing. She did not know she had an audience, would have stopped instantly if she had. This was the singing a person does when they believe themselves unheard, which is the only honest singing there is. But naturally, easily in tune, the voice of someone who would have been told in school that they could sing and who had then, in the ordinary business of becoming an adult, of becoming competent and married and a maker of useful and beautiful things, simply stopped and let the singing lapse, the way you let so much lapse, not by deciding to but by never quite deciding to keep it. One Tuesday I stood in the hallway outside the bathroom door and listened to the whole song. I don't know what it was, something old, something filmy from before our time, a tune with the particular ache of the songs people's mother sang. She sang it all the way through, not knowing I was there, her voice coming muffled through the door and the water, rising and falling, sure of itself in the way people are only sure of themselves when they think no one is keeping score. I stood very still in the hallway, the way I go still when I am thinking hard, the held-breath stillness Saloni had identified in me years ago, and I listened to my wife sing a whole song she did not know I could hear, and something turned over in my chest that I did not have a clean name for. 3 years. 3 years of this had been happening on the other side of a door, every Tuesday, and I had been on this side of it, not listening, and it had simply gone unheard into the water and the drain week after week, a small private beauty produced and lost, because the one other person in the house had not yet learned to pay attention. At breakfast I said, "You have a good voice." She looked up from her toast. Her face did the thing a face does when it has been caught at something private, not offended, exactly, but exposed, the specific startle of a person who believed a thing of theirs was unobserved and has just learned it was not. "I'm not singing," she said, reflexively, a denial of a thing not yet accused. "You were," I said, in the shower, just now, and I think every Tuesday. For 3 years, probably. You have a good voice. I never heard it before. I'm sorry it took me 3 years to hear it. But I heard it this morning, the whole song, standing in the hall like an idiot, and I had to tell you, you have a good voice. She looked down at her toast. She was quiet for a while, and I watched a series of things move across her face, and I did not rush her, because I had learned that the important things in Saloni surface on their own schedule and cannot be hurried up without being driven back down. "My mother sang," she said finally. I went still. I knew, now, what that meant in her, what cost the mention carried, how rarely she spent it. "We used to sing together," she said, "when I was small." She had a song for everything, a song for cooking, a different one for each dish, so you could tell what was for dinner from the next room by the tune. She said it almost exactly as she had said it on the roof. In the dark, in the summer, the same image, and I understood that the roof and the shower were the same wound surfacing twice. The mother coming up through the daughter's hands at the stove and the daughter's voice in the water. We'd sing while she cooked. I was her. I was the one she taught. And then she stopped. Her mother had died when she was 19. I knew the outline, had been given more of the inside on the roof. And I stopped. After. I just stopped singing. It wasn't a decision. One day I noticed I hadn't sung in a year, and then it had been 5, and then it had been. She turned her cup. It's been 15 years. I don't sing. Except, apparently, in the shower on Tuesdays, without knowing I'm doing it. My body still does it when my guard's all the way down. The rest of the time, I keep it shut. Why Tuesdays? I asked, gently. She thought about it and arrived somewhere she clearly hadn't been before. I don't know, she said slowly. Maybe we cooked on. She stopped. Her eyes changed. We cooked together on Tuesdays. My mother and I. It was the day my father worked late, and it was just us in the kitchen, and we'd make the whole evening of it, the two of us singing. Tuesdays. She looked at me, undone a little by her own discovery. I never put that together. 15 years, and I never noticed I only sing on Tuesdays. My body's been keeping her Tuesday this whole time, and I didn't even know. We sat with that. The enormous tender fact of it, that grief stores itself in the body's calendar, that a woman could keep a standing appointment with her dead mother for 15 years without her conscious mind ever being told. Sing more, I said. She looked at me. Not for me, I said quickly, because I saw the flinch, the reflexive recoil of a private thing asked to perform. I don't mean sing for me. I don't want a performance. I'd never ask you to. I mean just more. For yourself. For her. Sing more than Tuesdays. Sing while you cook the way she did. Sing in a workroom. Let it out of the shower. 15 years is long enough to keep a beautiful thing locked in a bathroom. I paused. You make beautiful things and give them to the world. You taught a room full of women that they're allowed to make a useless, beautiful thing for themselves. This is yours. The voice is the one beautiful thing you've kept locked up. Let it out. Not for me. Just let it out. It's been 15 years, she said again, but differently this time. Not as a wall, as a fact she was turning over, testing for weight. I know, I said. Start with Tuesdays. You're already doing Tuesdays. Just do them with the door open. That's all. One open door. See how it feels. And if it feels like something, do Wednesday. And then we'll see. She was quiet for a long moment, and then she nodded. Once, small, the way she makes real commitments, without flourish, the same nod she'd given the night she decided to attempt 12 impossible pieces by May. I had learned to recognize that nod. It was the most serious thing her body did. I heard her singing the next Tuesday. With the door open, not loudly. She had not become a different person overnight. The voice was tentative, a thing testing whether it was still allowed, but with the door open, deliberately, the song coming clear into the hallway now instead of muffled, offered rather than hidden. I was in the kitchen, and I did not go to the door, and I did not comment then or after because I understood that the worst thing I could do was make it a thing, turn the open door into a stage. I just let it come into the flat and be part of the flat, the way the light was part of the flat, and I made the chai, and when she came out I handed her the cup at the right hand, the right temperature, and said nothing about the singing, and she said nothing about it, and that nothing was an agreement, that this would be allowed to happen without being discussed, which is the only way some things can be allowed to happen at all. And the Tuesday after that. And then one evening, not a Tuesday, she was in the kitchen cooking, and I was at the table with the notebook, and she started very quietly, almost under her breath, to sing. A different song. A cooking song I understood. One of her mother's. She did not announce it, and she did not look at me, and I did not look up from the notebook, the two of us each carefully not making it a thing. But my hand had stopped on the page, and I was listening with the whole of my attention to my wife, singing her dead mother's cooking song over a pan in our kitchen. 15 years of silence breaking quietly over the onions, and I had to keep my eyes on the notebook for a while, longer than the sentence required, because some things you receive better by not looking at them directly. She sang while she cooked after that. Not always. Not performed, never performed. But it became, over those weeks, part of the sound of the flat. Part of its weather, its accumulated evidence. My wife's voice in the kitchen carrying a tune some woman had taught her 30 years ago in a different kitchen on a Tuesday. The song coming down the generations through the hands and the voice both. The cooking and the singing reunited at last after their long divorce. I wrote in the notebook, one of those evenings, while she sang at the stove. She's singing again. 15 years. It turns out her body kept her mother's Tuesdays the whole time, unconsciously, in the shower, where no one could hear, including her. All it took was for someone to finally hear it and say, "That's beautiful, let it out." 3 years I didn't hear it. I think about all the other things I'm still not hearing. The voice was behind a door I never opened because I never even tried the handle. What else is behind doors I've never tried? I'll spend the rest of my life trying handles. That's the whole project now. Trying the handles on a woman with more rooms than any house should have. Today a door opened and a dead woman's song came out, and my wife didn't even know she'd been keeping it. Attention, the rarest food. I served some this morning by standing in a hallway and finally listening. That night, in bed, in the dark, she said, "Thank you." For what? You know for what. I didn't do anything, I said. I stood in a hallway. You listened, she said. 3 years, and then you listened. Do you know what it is to be married 15 years to a silence and then have someone hear the thing under it? She was quiet a moment. She'd have liked you, she said. My mother. She liked people who listened. She'd have liked that you gave me back the Tuesdays without making me perform them. She'd have liked that you knew the difference. I wish I'd met her, I said. You're meeting her, Saloni said in the dark. Every time I sing now, you're meeting her. She's in the songs. That's where she lives. You're meeting her on Tuesdays, over the onions. Keep listening and you'll know her as well as anyone left alive does. Some weeks later, Piyush and Mira came up for a weekend, and on the Saturday night, after a long dinner, the singing left the kitchen for good. We were all loose with food and the lateness, the 4 of us around the table with the plates pushed back, and Mira, who had heard, somehow, perhaps from Saloni in one of their long calls, that the singing had come back, asked, lightly, with great care, whether Saloni would sing something. I tensed. I knew what the asking risked. I had spent weeks learning never to ask, never to turn the open door into a stage. I looked at Saloni, ready to cover for her, to change the subject, to hand her the out. She didn't take the out. She looked at her hands a moment, then at me. A quick look, checking the way she checks, and I gave her the smallest nod, the one that means whatever you want. I'll catch it either way, and she took a breath and she sang. A full song. Her mother's. For the room this time. Not under her breath over a pan, not behind a door, but offered, deliberately, to the 4 of us at the table, her eyes half closed, her voice steady and true and 15 years out of practice, and somehow none the worse for it. The kitchen held it. We all held it. And I watched it land on each of them. On Piyush, who had known Saloni for years and had plainly never heard this, his face gone soft and startled. On Mira, who missed nothing and who understood exactly what she was being given, the magnitude of a private thing made public for the first time in 15 years, and who had the grace to receive it without making it a thing. When it ended, there was the particular silence that follows a true thing, the silence that is the highest applause. Nobody clapped. Clapping would have been wrong. We just sat in it. "Bobby," Piyush said, finally, quietly, "I didn't know you could do that." "No one did," Saloni said. I'd stopped. For a long time. She looked at me across the table. Someone heard it through a door and gave it back to me. Mira looked at me then, the noticing look, the one that sees the whole shape of a thing in a quarter second, and she didn't say anything, but she lifted her water glass an inch off the table in my direction. A private toast. "I see what you did." The same gesture Piyush had made to the table in April, the family's substitute for the words we didn't have. I lifted mine back. Later, washing up, Mira came and stood beside me at the sink, the way she had that first Diwali, two careful people finding the quiet corner. "You gave her that back," she said, low, under the water. "The voice. Do you know what that is? People take things from each other for a whole marriage, 20 years of taking, mostly without meaning to. You gave something back. You found a thing she'd lost and gave it back to her." She dried a plate. "I told you once you were the other thing, not the thing you were afraid of being. This is what I meant. The other thing gives back." I didn't have an answer, so I did the thing my father does, the thing the whole family does in place of the words. I took the plate out of her hands and dried it myself and bumped her shoulder with mine once, which meant thank you, and I receive it and stop now before I can't. She understood. We finished the dishes in the good silence. That night I lay awake and thought about giving back as a category of act, because Mira had named it and the name had lodged in me the way her names always did. She was right that most of marriage is taking, not cruelly, just entropically, the slow attrition by which two people wear away each other's edges and call it settling. I had done my share. In the comfortable years, I had taken Saloni almost entirely for granted, had taken her competence and her chai and her presence and given back in attention, the cheapest currency there is. The year had been, among everything else, an enormous, violent rebalancing of that account. And this, the voice found behind a door and handed back, was the first thing I could point to that was purely giving, that took nothing, that simply returned to her a beautiful thing she'd lost and asked nothing in return. There would be more to give back, I knew. The voice was one door. There were others. 15 years of small lapsed things in a woman who'd been grieving since she was 19. Beautiful things set down and forgotten in the long business of surviving. I would spend the rest of the marriage finding them. That was the good work now, the opposite of the year's terrible work. Not digging tunnels through pain, but walking the rooms of a person I loved, trying the handles, finding the lovely lost things behind the doors, and handing them back, one at a time, for as long as we both kept choosing the mornings. So I keep listening, on Tuesdays and the other days now too. And I am, slowly, over the songs, coming to know a woman who died when my wife was 19, met entirely through the tunes she left to her daughter's body, which is, I have come to believe, a real way to know the dead, perhaps the only way, through the beautiful things they planted in the people they loved, that go on coming up, year after year, in voices and hands, as long as someone is paying enough attention to hear them. To be continued in episode 27, The Notebook's End.
Simbolo di copyright Mia.
All rights reserved. That was episode 26 of My Playful Wife. If this story is staying with you, The next episode is already waiting. Subscribe so you don't miss it. The complete book is on Amazon, and early episodes plus bonus chapters are on my Patreon. Links are in the description.
I've Mia.
Thank you for listening.